For those that do not know me, my name is Kyle Middleton. I was most recently the director of email and SMS on the Harris campaign. I've worked in digital fundraising for about the last 10 years or so, with both campaigns, big and small. Ooh, you're unmuting.
Thank you. My name is Amy Chinlai, pronouns are she, her, and I'm a software engineer at Action Network. I've been here since 2017, specializing in email deliverability and advanced features. But from 2022-ish to November, I was basically lent out to Kyle and Co. at the Harris campaign, working with them on their features to run the best program possible. So we'll start out with some background on deliverability. So some of you may be well studied in the art of deliverability as questions come up, and some as are not as experienced. So we'll send more information around in our deliverability guide. But to set a baseline, what is email deliverability? It is your email arriving in the inbox of the recipient as intended and not the spam folder. And this has a lot of impacts because if you get your deliverability right, your emails will arrive in the inbox when you expect and how you expect. But if you get it wrong, your message can be routed to the spam folder or completely blocked by the inbox provider. So that, of course, means you lose donations, actions, engagement, and it can take many emails, many weeks to recover. And that, of course, is bad for your program. But when we spend so much time crafting the perfect email, doing the QA, we need to make sure that that email ends up in our recipients' inboxes. Otherwise, it doesn't matter at all. So it is essential to our programs to have good email deliverability. And the key to good deliverability is engagement. Deliverability is, of course, determined by a multitude of factors, but this is the most important. And you have control over engagement in many respects because you want people to engage in your emails. You have control over the content. So engagement is generally made up of positive and negative signals. So in your CRM, like Action Network, you will see some of these signals like these in your statistics. So you, of course, on your overall stats, you'll see your opens and your clicks. You can see them by the first hour. You can see the stats by domain, but you have some stats that the inbox providers don't really have as much. So you can see what replies are happening to your email. If people are like, this is the best email I've ever received in my life. I love this email from XYZ. You can also see their conversions. You can see if your average donation amount is higher than usual or lower than usual, your number of donations, your petition signatures, all of that. And this all feeds into your signals on if you know if your deliverability is doing well or not. And on the inverse, we have our negative signals. And you do have insight into the spam complaints and the unsubscribes, but lack of engagement is one of your biggest indicators here, is if you're just not getting the donations or actions that you're used to. And my soapbox here, just a little mini soapbox, is that an unsubscribe is always better than a spam complaint. Unsubscribes are not bad. We will take that any day over a spam complaint. Now, with all of these engagement factors, the email providers, and by email or inbox providers, we are referring to Gmail, Yahoo, iCloud, Microsoft, and these inbox providers have more tech to answer this question: is an email likely to be engaged with? They do their best to predict engagement. And over the years, especially the last few years, this has changed a lot with AI and machine learning. And those algorithms have gotten increasingly more complex and unpredictable in some ways. So they use all these data points that we don't have insight to. Like, we don't know how long someone is reading our email for. If our email is 4 paragraphs long, we don't know if they're just clicking it so that they have a clean inbox or if they're really reading it, unless we know that they like clicked or made a donation. But the email provider can see that, and they can see, okay, has someone been subscribed for a really long time, and are they consistently interacting, or is it dropping off? Now are they interacting a lot? Did they have a really great welcome series? This person new to the list, and now they're engaging a lot. So all of those factors the email provider will take into account when determining how your deliverability will be, which we don't have, like I said, insight into all of those. And same with the negative signals. On the campaign with Harris for President, and we worked to create some features that would help identify these harder to identify signals, like developing the anonymized target booster, which can help refine your audience and find uh, recipients who would be well equipped to boost your deliverability and improve it. And we'll also look at these negative signals in respect to the ratios. So there's a lot of comparison between those positive and negative signals. We're going to look at the number of emails that someone received and then how much they've engaged and make that a nice little ratio. And we'll also develop like lots of mechanisms that Kyle will talk about later to use seedless to keep an eye on these negative signals. Are people making it into the inbox as expected? And so on. So there's a lot of different metrics that go into this, and this changes constantly. So at any given time, one of these metrics, like your opens, may become far more important than your unsubscribes, or vice versa. And it's unpredictable, and that's why deliverability is often called a dark art, because it can just change constantly.
And can I add one small caveat to this too, in my own little soapbox too, is that recently, especially in the last cycle, one of the positive signals that has kind of been split up for us is opens, and we've really started to narrow down on what the difference in behavior of verified and unverified opens are. And that really happened with kind of the changes to Apple mail protection privacy and kind of masking what opens look like. And so we've actually had to be a little bit more intuitive and watch a little bit more closely both open rates and kind of make judgments about their behavior based on what we're seeing.
Yes, very important caveat there. Thanks, Kyle. Great. So along with engagement, there are other factors that determine your sender fingerprint, and we call it a sender fingerprint intentionally. And we use that language because every email sender really is operating on its own individual characteristics. Every time it is its own sender, we're looking at their technical characteristics. The email provider is looking at the habits of that sender, how the recipient behaves. So besides the engagement, we're looking at these three buckets as the main things that can affect your sender reputation and deliverability. So the first bucket is IP reputation. And this is the IP address that you send from, which is like the computer or server that your CRM, like Action Network, is sending those emails from. Now, 10, 20 years ago, IP was the most important factor in determining deliverability, and it really operated in a vacuum. Like, is your IP good or is it bad? But that is not the case anymore. Inbox providers are not just looking at you on the basis of one individual IP, but also the group of IPs that you're using. So they are looking at the volume of email sent across the IPs, how frequent the email is being sent, and looking at that across each and every IP address. And each IP address only sends so many thousands of emails. So on a larger list, like a presidential campaign, you're using multiple IP addresses. Now, the second bucket is content reputation. So this is generally what you send. Inbox providers like Gmail have two goals. They want to provide a good service to their customers, which means they need to give people the emails they want to receive, and they need to prevent dangerous or scammy emails. And we have this saying in the deliverability world that the spammers set the standard, and this is especially true with content reputation. So, for example, spammers will often use broken HTML to hide links or language in their emails. Sometimes they do it unintentionally, like they just don't know how to code, and that's like fine. But sometimes it's so that they can hide things that are going to trick people into clicking those emails. So because of that, as email senders, as good email senders, we want to make sure that our HTML is clean, that there's no unclosed paragraph tags, that there's no unclosed headings. And those may seem really small, but they can actually hurt your deliverability, which we don't want, of course. So if you want to send a nice fancy email, but you don't really know how to code, use the drag and drop email builder, copy and paste from somewhere. Make sure to follow best practices on that. Because recently, like I think February of 2024 is when Gmail and Yahoo got a lot more strict about their requirements. So this is more important now than ever. And that goes for links and URLs too. Those tiny URLs and bit.ly URLs, great for like an in-person action, horrible for email. They mask the link that eventually someone is going to end up on. So Gmail has no idea if that link is to a reputable site, and therefore will send it to spam. but they also are keeping an eye on your unsubscribes. So when Gmail and Yahoo and Microsoft are looking at the emails, trying to determine their deliverability, they are looking for an unsubscribe link to make sure that it's clear, it's in the footer, and people are able to find it. In 2024, they also implemented some one-click unsubscribe requirements, which Action Network handles for you. Don't worry about it. But these requirements continue to change and evolve as the spammers evolve. So I think this, like, yeah, we have all these technical aspects of the content, but sometimes like the actual text and what you're saying matters too. I use this example a lot, but one time there was this labor union that sent an email to their list promoting life insurance, which was not a scam. It was not an ad. Genuinely, if you are working in dangerous conditions, having life insurance, a good idea. But their open rate from that one email plummeted below 5%. And it took so much work to recover. So that's not to say that if your content is important and like there is a Nigerian prince and you need to talk about the human rights impacts of that or something, like you need to do your important work, but like maybe test that to a smaller audience first before it disrupts your entire program. Our third bucket is domain reputation. So this is generally like a little more technical. You set it up, you let it go. You might not have to think about it again unless your candidate changes mid-cycle. Then you will have to think about it. And these are this is based on the reply to in your email address. You need to make sure you meet the technical requirements of DMARC, DKIM, SPF. If you don't know what those will be in the chat, I hope. But with our domain reputation, this has also changed a lot in the past few years. So these domains, similar to IP addresses, are not independent. They only make up part of your fingerprint. There's this misconception that if you change your domain, you will solve all of your deliverability problems and start from scratch. And that is simply not true. Like you can't go for amy-for-texas.com and then amy4texas.org and think that it will solve all of your problems. These are called cousin domains, and they do not trick the email providers. The email providers will be smarter than us on this for a while. So tricking them is not going to be your best bet. We have to, improve them the old-fashioned way. Oh, no. There we go. Okay.
And there are a couple of questions.
Oh, yeah.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. Do you want to take a look at, Amy? This is great.
Yeah, sorry. I cannot multitask. I'm so sorry.
I know we're going to get to the open rate question in here on this slide, actually. I think it kind of gets to some of that about what like good open rates look like.
Yeah. So Nathaniel asked, if you're getting email unsubscribes, does that mean your emails are in fact getting into people's inboxes? And yeah, because they have to like actually click that button. Most people aren't going to go to their spam folder and then unsubscribe from there. So having an unsubscribe is a good indicator that it's at least in the inbox. Oh, you already answered that, Kyle. Sorry. Bye.
Mark asks if someone has a dedicated IP versus on Action Network. A lot of our partners are on shared IPs. Is the reputation based on their dedicated IP or on the vendor shared IP?
Both. So because IP address is not the only thing that matters, you're looking at the IP bucket of working with all of those other partners who have good deliverability practices, who also go to this training. That's great. So those practices will take into account on the broader scale of the other partners, as well as your individual domain and sender reputation.
Ben had a question in here that I think I am able to answer because this happened to us during the domain transition. He was asking, while warming up new domains, the cycle, one-click unsubscribes can be stubborn to appear in recipients' inboxes, maybe a leading indicator for moving from low to medium domain rep. And I think I remember this happening to us as well, because after the domain transition, we were looking for days, if not weeks, in everyone who was receiving emails from us saying, do you have the unsubscribe at the top? Do you have the unsubscribe at the top? And it wasn't appearing there for people. And I do believe it was a domain at least in part, a domain issue where we needed to get our domain reputation up a little bit higher before that was going to be displayed for people. So yeah, I think that is generally the answer to the question. But Amy, if there's something I'm missing there, let me know.
Yeah, I want to say at some conference, they told us explicitly that it did rely on domain reputation.
Oh, this is an interesting question from Rosemary about domain reputation and asking if it's imperative that the org have a public-facing website for this. Um, Interesting. I actually don't. I guess it's hard. It's a challenging one for me to answer because in all the instances in which I've been emailing from a domain, that domain has been backed by a website because it's been a candidate that's had a website. So I can't actually speak to having a domain without having like at least a splash page or a landing page or something like that. So I'm actually not sure. I don't know if Amy, you've ever encountered that before.
I don't know if they actually are tied specifically. Most of the domain authentications aren't looking at a website. It's just like the host.
Mhm.
But there are plenty of organizations that have very good deliverability that are smaller, don't have a website yet, and they do have, good deliverability. So I don't think it would rule it out, but interesting question.
All right.
Great. Okay. Oh, and then I see a question from Steelworkers Local 959. Hello. A VPN would not affect any of this. The VPN is just like what you're operating from, but when you're using a CRM like Action Network, the emails aren't sent from your, VPN server, they're sent from ours. Great. Okay. So now reading deliverability statistics, keyword overtime. So my huge disclaimer on this slide is that deliverability is dynamic. When you are in a fast moving environment, whether it's a campaign or I don't know, the world is constantly changing and there's a million different policies and executive orders coming out every day, your audience will probably constantly change a little bit. So this chart is going to look different depending on what type of program you're running. It can vary email to email. So this chart, you need to look at it from like a 24-hour rolling period. But that can, of course, vary depending on frequency. So just a lot of asterisks around this, but it is supposed to help you figure out, is your email going to the inbox or not? And these numbers, again, should not be like they're flexible. If you're running a small dollar fundraising program and you have a 4% click rate, I like consistently, that's amazing. Good for you. Most people probably aren't going to have that, and having a 1% is very standard, very good. So you can't really compare it across all different avenues. So big asterisk around that. But again, all relative. And I think what is especially interesting about the open rate is how it has changed. So like Kyle said, in 2022 or 3, when Apple Mail Privacy came out and Gmail started prefetching images, you probably saw your open rates go way up and completely skyrocket. But those opens and um, regardless, weren't ever like completely reliable, but they did make it easier to see if your email was immediately going to spam. Because the way those mail privacy protection pre-caching works is that they will download those images, and then that is what is considered an open, is that that image is rendered. But when an email is sent to spam, those images do not get rendered. So they do not count as an open for someone that has mail privacy protection turned on. So if you see your, open rate that's typically at 50% drop below 5, you know that you have an issue and you're likely going to spam. So you're looking for consistency across your deliverability in order to define like where it's at. But if you have a problem, if you are having a deliverability problem and you need to change a part of your fingerprint, there's generally 3 levers that you can pull to affect these statistics and that deliverability. And it's what you send, how you send, and who you send to. And throughout the campaign, we did a lot of tinkering on those levers. So I can hand it over to Kyle to talk about how y'all did that.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are a lot of tools and ways for you to monitor deliverability. And these are just a few of them. These are all tools that we at one point or another used on the campaign. And I think there's a few interesting caveats here. So Google Postmaster tools is something that most all campaigns should be using and should be kind of looking at on a regular basis. It gives you most programs, the largest segment of their list is going to be Gmail. And so it gives you a really good sense of kind of just your overall program health. Um, there's also another tool run by Microsoft called SNDS. I think that's called, what's the acronym for that? Smart Network Data Services, I think. But it does a very similar function to Postmaster tools because Microsoft and Yahoo are also going to likely be larger portions of your list as well. So those are provided by the inbox providers and allow you to monitor kind of using their signals. And then I always like to talk about Bright Verify. I think it is something that it's in nowadays it's kind of a nice to have. But on the presidential campaign where we did have resources and we had the ability to kind of make sure that we were doing everything that we could, we used Bright Verify, which was a tool where every time that we were purchasing emails or doing acquisition, we would run all of the emails through this uploader. And the uploader would spit back to us a series of either, like I can't remember the exact values, but it was something along the lines of like, good, bad, or like, unable to email. And we actually worked with Action Network to build an API that every time we uploaded names to Action Network, it would run through Bright Verify. And depending on the outputs that Bright Verify gave us, we would actually unsubscribe a certain portion of people that we were uploading. So if it would kick back to us that this email was inactive, we would just unsubscribe that email address. And that actually helps with our long-term deliverability because at the front end, we're actually just removing people who we already know are not going to contribute positively to our deliverability. So that was kind of like a very early warning sign for our program to be able to filter out some of the bad. And then these two tools on the right-hand side, Inbox Monster and Everest, they are deliverability monitoring tools. So they will actually help you look at your deliverability on an individual email basis and allow you to do tons of different things like looking at open rates by domain, looking at your domain reputation, your IP reputation, checking out your spam reports, helping you just understand kind of what's going on. And the more you look at this data, the more you're able to spot anomalies or things that are not at your baseline and kind of pull them out and ask, why did that not perform as well? And so we found these tools extraordinarily helpful on the campaign to help us monitor our deliverability really closely. Cool. Okay. So we're going to walk through some scenarios here. There's two scenarios. These are scenarios that I've created, but are backed by actual real things that have happened. So there's a little bit of realness baked in here. I think it's important before we just kind of embark on this journey here to acknowledge that like deliverability is going to be very, very different for everybody. And the solutions that we come up here with here might not fit like everybody's program, but I think there are learnings here to be taken for how you can kind of address your own problems and work on solving your own kind of deliverability issues. Okay, so we're gonna run through two scenarios. The first scenario is you have a rapidly growing program. You're doing organic, you're doing paid acquisition, and you sent an email in the morning that had an abnormal spike in spam and a decrease in open rates. And then the second scenario, which we'll get to in a little bit, is you're running a medium-sized email program and you're switching to a new CRM with independent IPs and need to execute an IP warm-up. But we'll jump into the first scenario. Okay. So typically when you send an email and it doesn't, something's wrong. Maybe the open rate's really down, spam rate's really up, unsubscribes are really high. Something is off. There's kind of a series of questions on the campaign that I would always want to ask myself, kind of drilling down into where the problem arose from. And so we're going to walk through kind of all of these questions that you want to ask yourself when you're trying to solve a deliverability problem in the following slides. Okay. Okay, so catching the problem. So how do you even like go about catching the problem and knowing that it exists? I kind of broke this out into two ways, but if you have vendors like Inbox Monster or Everest, you're actually hopefully kind of using both of these combined to catch these problems. But one of the ways you can approach it, if you're using tools, like Inbox Monster or Everest, and you're monitoring your inbox placement, you'll be able to see and look at your reports that the inbox placement for the specific email was abnormally low compared to the rest of your emails for that day. Whether it's a top line view of seeing that it went from green to yellow, or actually looking at the numbers and seeing this is 5% lower than what we usually send to, something is going to be off in that report for you. But if you don't have vendor support, like a large majority of programs running campaigns don't, you have to just rely more on your own ability to understand kind of like what your baseline deliverability metrics are. What are your average verified and unverified open rates over the last, few campaigns you sent? For example, do you typically see 20% total open rates and now you've seen 10, or, something to that effect? And once you look at the stats more closely, you notice that the verified open rates are too low. And on the campaign, we would really use a mixture of those things. So we always kind of had a really strong understanding of what our baseline stats are, and we backed it up and kind of verified it by looking at the individual campaign level and tools like Inbox Monster or Everest. And then we would really be able to tell super, super clearly something is wrong here. And so now we know there's a problem, and we're gonna see what's on the next slide to help us continue to figure out how to solve it. Okay, so we know there's a problem. Something's off. Our open rates are really down. Our unsubscribes are up. How do we identify the cause of it? Like we stated in the scenario, our list is growing really, really fast. We're doing organic acquisition, which is like people coming in from the website, signing up for the program, signing up to receive messages. We're also doing paid acquisition. We're buying names from vendors. We're uploading them to the list. We're onboarding them to the program. So where is the problem, right? There's a lot of names coming in from a lot of different sources. So we just split these out into two different categories, organic and paid. And typically, and I say typically because this isn't always the case, but kind of as able as we are to be general here, we're going to say that like signing up organically on the website typically means you aren't going to hit spam immediately on an email that you receive. Of course, if we send a piece of really controversial content, that can often happen. I've done it before. Sometimes you send something that maybe is a little bit more inflammatory for your list, maybe a little bit more direct than what you're usually used to saying, and maybe your unsubscribe spike a little bit. But in this scenario, we didn't do that. So at this point, we can rule out that organic is likely not the cause of this problem. And so on the next slide, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper look at paid acquisition. So what do we know about like paid acquisition? These folks are generally more likely to hit spam or not open our emails because these are people that we've acquired. They didn't sign up for our list. They're people that we think might be interested in our emails, but we don't know. So we have to ask ourselves kind of two different questions, like who did we just buy, and who maybe just exited our welcome series if we're running a welcome series that isolates new acquisition from the rest of our list. And is there any correlation between the domains in the email that underperformed and the domains of emails that we just purchased? So did we just buy a lot of domains that are similar to the ones that just had poor performance? So those are two questions that we're going to ask ourselves. And then on the next slide, we're going to do some investigating. So we took a look at, and we noticed that a large batch of the paid acquisition that we just purchased just exited our welcome series, and is the reason why today our active list size grew. So this is actually really similar to something that would happen very often on the campaign. We were running so much acquisition that we had to really keep a close eye every morning on what our active list size was to get an understanding of how large it was growing from the acquisition that we were doing. So after we did this, we would run a report of openers by domain on the email that had a problem. And we noticed that Yahoo, which usually has a really high total open rate, just took a big hit. Let's say for the sake of the scenario, maybe it was typically at 40%, and now it's at 20. We know something is off here. So now we have identified that a large batch of paid acquisition has just come onto our active list. And on the email that we had a problem with this morning, Yahoo's down. So we go to the next slide. So we go to our ads team, and I would do this very, very often on the campaign and ask them for a domain composition of the acquisition buy that we made that just exited the ladder. For the campaign, we tagged all of our acquisition with specific tags. So I was, very quickly able to say like which of the people in this tag, what is the composition of their domains? How many Gmails are in here? How many Yahoos are in here? How many Comcasts are in here? And they run that report and let us know that a disproportionate number of Yahoo emails were in this paid acquisition buy that we just did. And so what we realized is that we didn't increase the amount of Yahoo volume relative to what we usually send every day, and it spiked our Yahoo volume too quickly, and we think we're getting filtered. And so what we mean by that is if on our active list, if the composition of Yahoo emails on our active list is say 10,000, and we just purchased acquisition and ran them through our welcome series and they exited out, but that buy had 30,000 Yahoo emails in it. Now, all of a sudden, our active list is sending to 40,000 Yahoo emails a day. And Yahoo is asking, why did you spike your volume by 4x in one day? And what is going on here? And the carriers, or not the, I guess not the carriers, but the inbox providers will often do that. They look very closely at volume and how you ramp up your volume. And if all of a sudden, you 4x the amount of a certain domain that you're sending to, and also it could be paired with a high unsubscribe rate, that's going to send off a flag to the carrier that maybe you're spamming people. And so in this case, that is what we arrived at. And I think we'll break it down a little bit more on the next slide, just kind of walk back for everybody and just recap what happened in this scenario. So just to start off, we sent an email. It had a spike in spam and a decrease in open rates. We ruled out organic acquisition and we focused on paid acquisition. We found a large batch of emails that recently exited the welcome series. And of those emails, we found, or well, actually, we found that the problem email had an abnormally low open rate for Yahoo, which correlated with the high amount of Yahoo names that we just acquired. And we arrived at the conclusion that we're being filtered because we ramped up our volume too quickly without realizing it. And it's really important to have a good understanding of the names that you are acquiring and to set limitations on domains that you're buying. I know on the campaign, we struggled with a few different domains. And so part of our acquisition strategy was simply just not buying any of those domains until we either improve them, or if we were not able to improve them, we would at least want to save the money by not buying email addresses that we couldn't send emails to. And so having some control over that and having good coordination with your ads team who might be doing the acquisition is really important. Okay, last slide, and then I know there's some questions in here, and we can actually, I think there's, can you go back to? Yes. Okay, so just to get to the how we fixed it and how we know it works, it's a super important question. I often find that like sometimes people will identify the issue, maybe try to put in a fix, but then never really follow up and know if the fix that they made worked. And so I think it's really important once you've actually arrived at least your proposed conclusion to the problem, you test it and make sure that it works. And so uh, oftentimes too in deliverability issues, I will see that people kind of overreact and remove a high percentage of the problem domain because they think that shrinking the audience is going to help with their deliverability. And that's not necessarily a wrong way to think about it. But if you cut too much of the audience and actually shrink your daily volume much lower than what you're doing, it can also have the same kind of adverse effect. So in this instance, since we know where the problem kind of began, what we're going to try to do here is remove the problem emails from the acquisition buy and remove them from our active list and see if that improves our open rates with Yahoo in this instance. So we're just going to remove the Yahoo emails from the buy in question, and continue sending emails. And we're going to watch the open rates on our next email, and we're going to pull out open rates by domain and look at Yahoo. If we see that the Yahoo domain improves on the next send, we'll continue. We'll continue and watch closely, but we'll continue. But if we see either the same kind of performance or worse performance on our next send, then we can continue kind of culling Yahoo emails back. So if our baseline was 10,000, maybe we remove the top 10 to 20% that are the worst performing Yahoo emails and continue to kind of scale back until we can see those open rates hit the number of our baseline that we were expecting. And then you can build back your volume. You can start adding in some people that are less likely to open, but will get you back up to that desired volume count. Okay, now we can answer some questions here. Let's see.
I think Amy grabbed the questions in the chat, but maybe there. Oh, here's a new one from Nathaniel.
Yeah. We actually, so the question here is running a program where you're sending only the actives, you have an average open rate that's pretty high, a click-through rate that's pretty healthy, low spam rates, but your donation reputation kind of unexplainably dropped from high to medium and stayed there for a while. I feel like something similar kind of happened to us often on the campaign where our domain reputation would fluctuate without a lot of strong reasoning as to why. And I think we would often try to draw some conclusions about why that's happening. But I think unfortunately, like sometimes the answer is that some of these things are a little bit opaque on purpose. And it's actually like up to us as the practitioners to kind of build theories, make assumptions, and test them and see if any of those little changes that we're making are improving on the margins. And sometimes actually what it just can be is like sometimes these carriers, especially if it's like Google or something, they might make a change internally and not like tell you. And then it's actually something that like the inbox provider changed for the entire ecosystem and it's impacting all accounts and it takes a little while to kind of restabilize your domain reputation. So yeah, these things are kind of they are sometimes purposely opaque. Let's see, someone. Oh, Amy's there too.
Yeah, and Ben said that they noticed a lull in like volume or no sends can definitely drop deliverability, and that's very true. It's the consistency of how frequent you send an email does matter, and we saw that like with Kyle's Yahoo example.
Someone asked in here, do you ever recommend going to Gmail or Yahoo directly and letting them know about deliverability problems? And the answer is yes.
Will
The answer
they answer your emails? Maybe not.
But I will say we actually saw incredible success with this working with our deliverability vendor partners. So like folks like Inbox Monster or Everest, they have relationships with people at these inbox providers and people they can reach out to and either submit tickets or flag tickets or kind of raise them a little bit higher for folks. And so it's kind of also like an additional like little superpower of working with a vendor like this is you can you have the ability to tap into those relationships and kind of get your programs seen a little bit more, which is nice. Recommended frequency. Is there a recommended frequency for of communicating with the list, or is it recommended that whatever the frequency is stay consistent? I think like frequency really depends on your program and the size of your program and like what makes sense to you all for communicating with them. Now, I think like there's a reasonable expectation that like, you know, you shouldn't send somebody 10 emails in one day. But like, you know, yeah, I think for it you can also use the metrics as a guide as well too. Like if your program is used to sending one email a week and you're considering going to two or three, go to two for 1 week. What are your open rates look like between those emails? Did you see a major decrease and maybe your list isn't ready to to see you 2 times a week? Go back to one. But maybe if your metric kind of hold, you can do 2 emails a week and then you kind of continue pushing, but let the metrics be your guide. Um, someone said I inherited a program of 40,000 emails with a 9% open rate. Would our best move to be start from a small send size per domain based on engagement and build from there? How small should we start? Or frequently, should we increase the size? So, oh, Amy, do you have something there?
Oh, yeah. So I would say you should pull some reports first. So you should see of those 9%, is there, are people all coming from one domain? How many people, like, where is the majority of this number coming from? And if it's like just targeted in like one or two domains, then you can focus on those, start small, just take the most active and then rebuild. But if it's not like more widely, if you're not having deliverability problems more widely across every domain, you don't necessarily need to cut back sending or audience size for those larger domains.
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar, like, build some reports of like activity levels and then look at what those are compared to the total size. If you run a big report for 30-day, actives, and you find that that's 15,000 of the 40,000, maybe start there, and see what maybe that open rate gets you to 15-20%, and then you can build from there. So yeah, definitely look for activity, and then build up from there.
And Josie asked, at what point would you consider moving to a subdomain? They've worked with clients with months of 5% open rates, and the reputation was hard to repair. Kyle, what are your thoughts on this?
There are risks and rewards. I think so much. I kind of like say it too often, but deliverability is just a giant risk assessment. Like I think in this case, without a ton of other details, I would say like try everything that you can with the domain that you're working on. Make sure that you've kind of exhausted all your avenues with the one you've worked with. Maybe it's too far gone, but make sure that you've like tried everything. But then yeah, if you really feel like you've navigated all of those areas and it's not working, spinning up a new subdomain is fine. You just have to be really, really careful. We'll talk about in the next scenario, kind of like IP warm up, domain warm up type situations. And those are just really fragile kind of periods of time where you have to be really careful. So it is not any easier to start a new subdomain than it is to fix your current domain.
And it's a lot easier to wreck a new subdomain. So it's something to be careful with, because also depending on like how much they're like the inbox providers are paying attention, they'll just be like, okay, we're reassigning this reputation to the new subdomain.
Someone in here asked if we had a better experience with Inbox Monster or Everest. And I would say that we typically had a better experience with Inbox Monster. We used them for a longer period of time on the campaign. I really like their data visualization that they provided. It felt like a richer experience when we were looking kind of at like an individual campaign level. So it's very cool. And then actually there's one other question that just said, for campaigns, many of us are sending not just emails for donor outreach, but also press and media, which tends to often have more dynamic list and frequency of sent.
Yeah. So that's actually a very interesting use case for a subdomain. Sorry, my keyboard went haywire. Because like you can see some people do like media.org.com, and that's often helpful. But your press list and media list is often a lot smaller than like your campaign list. So a lot of the deliverability is very volume based. So, if your press list is less than 1,000 people, but your actual list is like 100,000, the media list isn't going to impact that broader 100,000 group.
No. And honestly, probably like people on the press list are probably opening that email because they want to see, what you're promoting. So it probably has good enough deliverability at that point. But yeah, great question. Okay, let's dive into scenario two. Scenario two is really all going to be about IP warmups. In this kind of scenario I've laid out, it's a medium-sized email program. You're switching to a new CRM. It has independent IPs. So the assumption here we're going to make is that you're coming from shared IPs and you're moving to your own independent IPs. And you need to execute an IP warmup. Okay. Um, every IP warmup is going to be different, which is going to make this conversation, I think, a little like not tricky, but I think everyone's going to have unique questions kind of to their own programs. IP warmups can really vary on a variety of things. Your total list size, especially compared to your active list size, what those look like. The starting point of your list health, are you switching because the shared IPs and the domain that you're currently on are actually underperforming and you're hoping to switch to a better environment and build, a better reputation for yourself? Is that not the case at all? And maybe you're switching for a completely non-deliverability reason and your deliverability is okay, and you're just looking to move it over to a new CRM, can greatly impact, where you begin. The CRMs you're working with can also impact, an IP warmup, just depending on like, how you upload and target and kind of the kind of actual mechanisms of performing the IP warmup. And then content and attention. I think like one thing that is absolutely integral to running a successful IP warmup is sending content that is very, very clickable and has very eye-catching open or subject lines. Because the crux of all of this is that you want people to engage with these emails to build good sender reputation. And then also attention. Obviously, we're on a presidential campaign. We had a lot of attention on us, and that is not always the case for smaller campaigns or PACs or organizations, and especially where getting people to engage with your program at this stage is so important. Being creative about the content that you're sending, if your program isn't receiving a lot of attention at the moment, will be even more important for you. So that's just a few of the things to keep in mind as we start talking about this. We can go to the next slide. But luckily, the tools that you're going to use are going to be the same, which is really nice. Many campaigns use Spark Post IP warmup schedule. It's right over here. I took a little screenshot of it, but you can, if you just type in Spark Post IP warmup in your Google browser, it'll be the first thing that pops up. I think I know that web page like front and back because I've used it so many times, but it also has a lot of really, really good advice that isn't in here on just like how to run an IP warmup. So if you're really interested, I'd definitely recommend taking a look at that. You're also going to add your new IPs to your Google Postmaster. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring performance on all the same places that you already would be. Similarly, you're going to monitor, if you're monitoring already with Inbox Monster or Everest, you'll connect your new domain and IPs, to those platforms so that when you start sending, you can monitor. And then flag this moment for any of your deliverability vendors if you're working with them so they can help you monitor. You don't need to do this alone. Every single time that we were doing something more than the usual of intensity with deliverability on the campaign, I would flag it not only for Inbox Monster, but also for Action Network and like some of the other folks that are watching our signals and making sure, that we're having good reputation. So there are people that can help you as well. Okay, so in theory here, you've connected all of these things. Your Postmaster's up and running. You're able to monitor campaigns in whichever tool you're using, and you're ready to go. So now what? Really, I think one of the core most important things before you even embark on sending is figuring out who your audience is. What is your total list size? What's your active list size? Can you achieve a warm up with just your active list, or are you going to need less active names? And how that really is determined for you is, say your active list currently that you send to every day is 500,000. Or actually, sorry, yeah, yeah, that'll work. But your total list is like 1 million. And so in order to warm up to 500,000, are you going to be able to use your whole active list or not in the scenario that I just laid out? Yes, but like sometimes those numbers don't actually work out and you're going to need to take less active names in order to get to your desired volume goal. You're also going to need to make a plan. This is something that like you can kind of get away with doing this without having like a plan written down. But I would highly recommend that you plot out a course of who you're going to send to each day on a schedule. And that kind of gets to how you want to cut down your audiences, part of making your plan. In this instance, I use 14 days because I believe 14 days is the 500K mark. But depending on the audience size goal you want to get to, your IP warmup could run for 3 weeks. It could run for almost, I actually think 3 weeks is kind of the top end. The scale starts to get much higher on the number of emails delivered every day. Once you get past day 14, it starts to multiply pretty good. So there's a few different ways that you can kind of think about this. You could cut 14 different audiences for 14 different days. So you could take like your active list and just cut it into 200, 400, all the way to 1,000. Sorry, all the numbers down there. Or you could just use one single audience and you could cut off portions of it every day. So you could say send to this audience, but limit it to 200, send to this audience, limit it to 500, excluding all of the emails that you sent before. I've done it both ways. I think both ways work very well. Really, the question you kind of have to ask yourself is, are you going to need to mix in less active names? That really kind of gets down to how you want to cut up your list. And then the last thing I have on here is just prepare yourself and your team. Make sure they understand like the IP warm-up schedule, why you're doing this. IP warm-ups are really fragile and making mistakes can be costly. So I know when we did this on the campaign, I had a few set meetings with like our entire team and I laid out the entire process, what we were going to do, why it was important, allowed them to ask all the questions they wanted to ask because I really needed everyone to be bought into the idea of what we were doing because small mistakes are so costly during IP warm-ups. Okay, this is my favorite slide on this presentation. It is a little goofy, but doing an IP warm-up is like making a risotto. If you've ever made risotto is actually one of my like more favorite foods to make, just personally. But anyways, most people follow the schedule with their active audience until they run out of email. So you'll continue just using the audience kind of that you've had, your active audience, and send to it every day in those little portions, working down the list. But say, for example, if your warm-up volume target is 500,000, but your active list is only 250,000, when you get to the day where you have to send 325,000 emails, you're going to need to mix in a reasonable batch of 75,000 people to get you to that send volume for the day. And so, kind of like a risotto, you will mix in some worse names to help you hit that volume goal. Now, on the campaign and even in other times where I've done IP warm-ups like this and didn't have like as deep of analytics support, it's still worthwhile when you're looking at that batch of 75,000 names to try to take the best 75,000 you can, right? You don't want to kind of just blindly go in there and take any 75,000 you can find. You want to try to run a few reports and try to find your kind of like next best subsection beyond your active list and try to work some of those people in because you still want to try to get as many positive signals on these emails as possible. And so mixing in too many people that are either not going to open or might hit unsubscribe or spam could kind of set you back in the IP warm-up process. And then there's another little trick here too, like in this example, when you get to 500,000, if your program allows for it, like if you're able to send, multiple emails in a single day, you could feasibly send to your 250,000 active audience twice in one day to get to that 500,000 volume goal for the day. So it might be a case where maybe you only have to mix in bad names for a day or two till you can get to a place where maybe you can do multiple sends in one day. So there's multiple different kind of avenues and strategies for send volume and how you go about cutting that up. what to watch out for. There are a few different things here that I've encountered regularly while doing IP warmups that can actually be a little scary. And so I think just talking about them is good. First and foremost, like don't be alarmed if your open rates fluctuate during the warmup. Because you're cutting an active audience into so many little segments, you are, in fact, actually kind of taking different subsections of your active list that could actually be more or less active than others. So on your first day, when you send a 200, if your open rate doesn't look that good, but on the next day, when you send a 500 and you allow, 300 more, hopefully, good people in who would like to take action, your open rate could change. And so, it might fluctuate a little bit, and that might look a little, the waviness of it might be a little scary, but usually 9 times out of 10, the best thing that you can do is just stay the course and watch and make sure that it doesn't dip too significantly low or to such a scary place that you're like, this isn't working. Because if you're looking at this over multiple days and you do end up seeing kind of consistently poor performance, which I think is like the indicator here is consistently, it might be time to reevaluate your active audience, maybe narrow it. Maybe you went too big at the start, and maybe you need to actually find a hyper active audience of people to do your smallest segments on. And then once you get to a few thousand, you can use your regular active audience. And that's something that we've had to do before, especially with a new domain. It can be really finicky. And so sometimes you got to put your absolute best people first. And then just know that you'll be juggling sending emails between 2 CRMs for, up to 2 weeks, maybe even more. And you should plan for it. It is not easy. If you're used to doing the kind of the same cadence of something every day where you're building an email, sending it, watching it go out, building the next, maybe you're learning a completely new CRM. Not all of these CRMs use the same terminology. Maybe you're learning kind of how different platforms deal with different things. And so prepare yourself and your team for the increased workload and the complexity of also suppressing audiences between 2 CRMs. Because that is the other thing that is kind of goes unsaid in this scenario, but is really important. You have to stagger your sends. And so on the campaign, what we would usually do is the first send in the morning would go to the new domain, the new IPs. And then anyone who received that first email of the day would be suppressed from our main program as we sent out the rest of the emails. So really just, and that's also not easy to kind of manage lists between 2 CRMs and always ensure that, you're suppressing the right groups. There's a lot of things going on there.
And we are at time. We do have like a little bit more left. I know, Kyle, we just love deliverability so much, but we will be sending out the slides and the recording to folks who have to leave now, but we can finish it out.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I would have went faster. I didn't realize. Okay, yes. So very quickly, IP warmup versus domain transition. The reason we talked about IP warmups here is because they're a lot more applicable to many more programs. And a domain transition was a very, very unique thing for the Harris campaign. We had to transition our sending domain from joebiden.com to kamalaharris.com, something that hadn't really been done before, especially like mid-cycle when we were sending a lot of volume. Optimally, we would do something like this when things were slower and much quieter. But that obviously wasn't the case. We had like 100 days left. And so we ran a slightly more advanced IP warmup, I would say. We used a Google Sheet and kind of like a matrix to track dozens of different audiences that were being uploaded between both CRMs. We would coordinate send times internally to ensure that the new domain was getting optimal placement, like in the morning, like I was just talking about. But we followed the same like principles and guidelines of an IP warmup and kind of just modified it to meet the needs of our deliverability benchmarks. And so it was a scary thing, but it really had a lot of the principles of something that we've done often before. And so that's why I wanted to talk about an IP warmup today. Okay. It's the risotto analogy. I was just reading through some of the questions here. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's the end of the content we have. So happy to answer a couple questions. So John asked if the active list is only 250K, why the target warm-up volume would be 500K, and can you send multiple emails in a day?
That's a good question. I think maybe I did that to fit the scenario and make it work a little bit better, because if your active audience is 250,000, you're probably not going to want to get to 500. It worked better here for that. But there are often times where you want to push past like your active list. Like, you know, if you know, for example, that you have a lot of paid acquisition coming down the pipeline, and your active list size is going to grow, you know, to 500,000, 750,000, you know, from where you are at 250. And it actually happens to catch you in a time where you're doing an IP warm up. Maybe you do want to like stretch past like where your current active list size is. And then on the multiple emails a day, yeah, it kind of just depends on like what your program already allows for. Like if you're already sending multiple emails a day, typically what that will mean is in the earlier stages of your IP warmup, you're just sending your, you know, your small audience segment to the new domain and the IPs, and you're continuing to run your multi-day email program out of your old CRM. And once you get up to a high enough volume in the IP warmup, maybe where you're able to do 100 or 250,000 person sends, you could break that up into multiple sends. Um, Certainly on the new domain, when you start doing that, you're going to want to watch that day, the first time that you send two emails, to make sure that the open rates are steady. Something that you might see is on that second email, you might see a steeper drop in open rates. And I think it's, again, it's kind of like a risk assessment. Is it uh, uh, not, is it a steep enough drop that it's concerning, or is it not so steep where you think you can get away with kind of sending two, and those open rates will kind of level out at a even place. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say also like the reason you might go above that 250K is like if that's just your actives, but you have 3 different tiers of how, you know, of actives, you might at some point go above that 250K threshold. So what's like this highest point you're going to push? Great. Okay, well, it was so good having everyone on. We'll send out the slides, but thank you so much, Kyle. Great to have you and see you per usual.
Yeah, you as well. And yeah, thanks everyone for staying a little bit long. Didn't even realize that we were here, but I appreciate you all staying and talking about email deliverability with us.
Yes, thank you. Okay, have a good one.